Welcome to your final lecture for Chapter 4. So we're going to start to talk about how seafloor sediments can actually represent the surface ocean conditions and then go into how sediments can be used as resources. So basically, tests are going to sink really slowly from the surface ocean to the seafloor, and they can also get moved horizontally by ocean currents before they settle. So one of the main ways that we actually get particles to move to the seafloor is by fecal pellets. So this is when organisms are eaten and then the hard parts of them are excreted as waste. So this way they actually are able to settle really quickly. So they sink in 10 to 15 days instead of the 10 to 50 years it would take if they went directly from the surface to the seafloor. So for the exam, know that fecal pellets increase the settling rate of fine particles in the open ocean. And here's an example of a fecal pellet, and they actually enlarged it microscopically so you can see the remains of coccolithophores here and actually other debris within it. So it takes those remains and takes them to the seafloor quickly. So if you find them on the seafloor, you know what the conditions were like above it. This image shows you marine thickness. So those reds are thicker numbers, or thicker amounts of sediments. And you can see typically we see these along the continents. And that's because we're going to be close to those sources. And you see thinnest sediment happens where the seafloor is young, so along our mid-ocean ridges and the middle of oceans. And that's because sediments accumulate really slow in the deep ocean. Also, in these areas, seafloor is constantly being created, so there hasn't been enough time for sediment to accumulate on top of it. So as the seafloor ages, it moves further away from the mid-ocean ridge or the center, and it gets progressively older and also has more sediments that pile on top of it. So now we're going to look into resources that we get from marine sediments. So we get both mineral and organic resources. The problem is not a lot of these resources are easily accessible, so recovery is going to involve technological challenges and a really high cost. So the two main ones that we're going to talk about are petroleum and gas hydrates, and you need to know that for the exam. So petroleum is the ancient remains of microscopic organisms buried within marine sediments before they could decompose. So actually more than 30% of the world's oil is from offshore resources. And that's due to technological advancements employed by those offshore drilling platforms that we've talked about. Because of that, future offshore exploration is going to be intense. And that's really bad because that means more oil spills can happen. So the second most common type are gas hydrates, which are also known as clathrates. And these are compact chemical structures made of water and natural gas. So they form only when high pressure squeezes chilled water and gas molecules into an ice-like solid. Methane hydrates are actually the most common form, and we typically see these beneath Arctic permafrost areas. So basically it's like gas being trapped inside of a cage of frozen water molecules. So what's interesting is that gas hydrates actually resemble chunks of ice, but they burn when lit. So they get created when bacteria break down organic matter trapped in the seafloor sediments and produce methane gas with minor amounts of ethane and propane. So the seafloor methane actually supports a rich community of organisms, and we see a lot of these along the continental shelf. The problem is when we're trying to get these resources, we could actually be releasing seafloor methane, and that can alter the global climate. Also, the warmer waters may kind of melt that ice-like structure and release more methane. All of this methane release can actually cause slope failure underwater and create tsunami hazards that didn't exist before. So when we're looking at our energy resources, gas hydrates may actually be the largest source of usable energy. So for the exam, know that gas hydrates and petroleum are the main energy resources associated with marine sediments. Some other resources that we can get are sand and gravel. These get mined by offshore barges using suction dredges, and they're used as aggregate in concrete and as fill in grading projects and on beaches. Some other ones are evaporative salts. These get formed when seawater evaporates, and then the salts increase in concentration until they can no longer remain dissolved, and they precipitate out and form salt deposits. Again, gypsum we use as drywall, plaster for casts. Halite is our common table salt. Another example is phosphorite, which is phosphate minerals, and we use these as fertilizers for plants. And finally, the last resource are rare earth elements. And this is an assortment of 17 chemically similar metallic elements, and we typically use these in technology. So we use them in our cell phones, TVs, and light bulbs. And what this shows us that the seafloor may actually hold more rare earth element deposits than we have found on land. So the more we find on the seafloor, the more we're going to disturb it, because we're going to go out and mine it and try to drill and get these resources, which is going to be hazardous to not only the environment, but cause issues with oil spills and other hazards that can happen when you're disrupting the seafloor and bringing in technology. So this is the end of Chapter 4. Make sure you take the Chapter 4 quiz and look at the assignments tab on Canvas to make sure you do any other assignments associated with this chapter.